is someone who decides on Jewish law, and it takes certain skills. For instance, you should not discuss your rulings on a case with a litigant, privately before you take his case. There are all sorts of things you don't do, and there are some terrific rabbis in this town who've gotten in trouble when they've acted as a posek because they've given an interview about the case to a newspaper, giving their opinions on the case before the case comes to them to rule on it. So there's also a personality that's just much better suited for being a posek, a judge. It's like someone who's able to remove himself from the kind of bonds and concerns that most people feel, and is able to be dispassionate and impartial. It's a special skill that most people don't have.
Right. Yeah, few people can do that.
Love talks about if you want to choose a king for yourself. I want a king. Okay, you can have a king whom God shall choose. So you say, I want a king, I want a king, I want a king. So we're talking Deuteronomy chapter 7 verses 14 and 15. You shall surely set over yourself a king whom God shall choose. So you want a king? Okay, God's going to choose the king. So you don't seem to have a lot of freedom there. So what do you think the Torah's attitude towards kingship is? It seems to be quite ambivalent.
Well, it's just that, it's ambivalent. I mean, the thing about once a king is selected, that monarchy is in place, and you don't get to keep choosing and re-choosing kings. It's all about lineage at that point.
Sorry.
It's the whole "be careful what you wish for" cliche. And this happens in the Hebrew Bible. People want a king, they want a king, they want a king, and then they're not happy with what they get.
Seems kind of impractical to say, as Samuel said, I will not be your king, the Lord shall rule over you. Very few nations are able to be ruled just by God. Picture back then, 3,000 years ago, you got this unruly collection of tribes having to fight battles and conflicts and create a society. It doesn't seem realistic to sustain a nation back then that's constantly fighting wars and having to negotiate with very dangerous neighbors. Doesn't seem realistic. Oh, God will rule over you. I mean, you need a king.
Yeah, it's a really interesting rhetoric to say, I'm not going to be the king. Because he is the king. He can say that because he is the king.
We have a question in the chat room. What does Monica think about evolution? And what should be its place in Judaism?
Because that's in Deuteronomy,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. It's right next to the verse about kings.
I don't know. I don't think about evolution.
You don't think about evolution?
Not usually.
Okay.
I could, but
we had the 4 layers.
I don't really care.
We had the 4 layers of secular impurity on Torah Talk on Monday night. So the first layer was evolution, and then I think equality was in there, and so that's Rabbi Rao's perspective, and he's Haredi. He's very frum.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's just not my question, I guess.
You haven't lost sleep.
No, I haven't. I don't.
Evolution in Judaism.
Maybe that's the way it is. Maybe it's not. I don't. I'm more concerned with ethics than evolution.
I've got to ask, how much does your concern with ethics affect your behavior?
I don't know that it affects my behavior very often, unfortunately.
I'm totally obsessed with ethics too. I was totally obsessed with ethics when I directed a porn movie. So
it affects my level of self-awareness.
Yeah, it affects my level of awareness.
Yeah, but it's such a cerebral fascination with or devotion to ethics that it should, I mean, I have all sorts of grand ideas about how my scholarship should influence my behavior. Whether or not it does is probably another story. Hopefully it will at some point.
Do you think professors of ethics tend to be much more ethical than...
I don't. I don't. No.
Do you think that people who daven 3 times a day in synagogue are more ethical on average than people who don't?
I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I want to say yes. I want to say that that makes you a better person.
Has that been your experience? You've been around Jewish life for a few years. But you don't know that many people who actually daven 3 times a day in a shul.
Not many.
Yeah.
Not many that daven 3 times a day.
What about, you've known some people keep very strict kosher, so strict in fact that if you were to bring your shiksa cupcakes over to their house, they would not let them in the door because they were not kosher. Have you found in your experience that being very strict about kosher leads to someone who's very strict about ethics?
I think it can. I think they can be very strict about ethics, but they can also become so consumed about what they're supposed to do and not do that it becomes very egotistical and very narcissistic because you're so focused on what you are doing and not doing that you forget about the other.
Consequences of your strictness on
That's
yourself.
Right. That's
You're being
right.
righteous at the cost of other people's dignity.
Right. Which inevitably is a breach of ethics because, you know, at the heart of the ethical is the awareness of the other and a concern for the other, you know, in a very non-egalitarian kind of way. So if you're so concerned about what you're doing and what you're not doing, I think it's very easy to, you know, allow the ethical to collapse.
You sound a lot like Jesus. I'm sure a lot of people
And I'm
have told you
33,
that.
so...
About time for you to be crucified.
This is the year. This is the year I'll be crucified.
This is the Torah talk that will do it.
Yeah, this is it.
I love how you said that you kind of had a hard time with this pasha because it's very legalistic, and you know, your approach to Judaism is so philosophical, and Judaism is so practical and non-philosophical. There are absolutely philosophical elements to Judaism, and you can be very philosophical about Judaism, as Monica is, but the actual Torah and the actual way it is practiced and organized and lived in the world, and the emphasis of his primary text is not on philosophy. There's very little philosophy in the 5 books of Moses. There's a lot of very specific behavioral prescriptions. There are a lot of laws, but not a lot of philosophy.
No, I think I think it's about the philosophical, the mystical, and the halachic kind of colliding against one another. I think that's what Judaism is for me when I read this text. We may not see on the surface the philosophical, but I think it demands, I think the way in which the text is constructed demands a philosophical reading. I think that we supply that necessarily so. I mean, it's such an intricate, you know, such a complex text that it requires us to read it philosophically and to understand it in these philosophical, mystical terms. I mean, I talk about this all the time, you know, in Exodus, the idea of, you know, we will do and we will hear. You know, it's so strange. Action comes before hearing, you know, but it's the doing that initiates the understanding. I mean, that's a very philosophical concept. You know, it doesn't necessarily seem like it on the surface, but it really, really is. And I think you have to think philosophically to get that, and yet that's, you know, in many ways really the heart of Orthodox Judaism.
Is Judaism primarily a philosophical construct for you?
Not at all. No, it can't be.
It's not primarily
it's
philosophy.
If it's primarily philosophical.
It's not primarily philosophy.
No.
Is it primarily literature?
No, it's all of these things. You can't take one away. You can't give one more weight than another. It's all of these. It's literary, mystical, philosophical, halachic. You know, whatever word you want to
very
use.
physical as well. It's all about, and you shall take this, and you shall do this with this, and you shall.
Right, it's the whole separation.
You know,
and
you shall eat this, and you shall drink this, and you shall do this, and it's very pragmatic, very practical, and I like. We're talking about the face or respecting someone's presence. I've always rebelled at the idea of standing for the President of the United States, because only the United States Press Corps does that for the United States President.